October 24th, 1944. Philippine Sea. The morning sun rose over a battlefield that stretched beyond the horizon. Across the Pacific, fleets clashed in what would become one of the largest naval engagements in human history. American carrier groups surged forward toward the liberation of the Philippines. Japanese forces fought desperately to stop them. Every hour brought new losses. Every minute reshaped the fate of nations. For Lieutenant Kiyoshi Ogawa, this day would begin with duty and honor, and end with a truth so powerful that it would follow him for the rest of his life, a truth that would shatter everything he had been taught to believe. At 0400 hours, Kiyoshi stood beside his Zero fighter at Mabalacat Air Base. The humid air clung to his skin. Sweat rolled from his hairline even before dawn broke. For 3 years he had flown into the teeth of war, completing 73 missions with the quiet skill of a man destined to die young. But something about this morning felt different. His squadron commander had summoned them before sunrise, his voice steady as he announced that the Americans had returned with more than 100 ships. Their orders were simple: strike the carriers, strike again, return only if fortune allowed it. Rumors of a new tactic drifted through the ranks: kamikaze units, pilots intentionally crashing into American ships. But Kiyoshi's mission remained conventional: dive, fire, escape, repeat until death or victory. He accepted this without hesitation. Death meant honor. Survival meant another chance to defend his homeland. As he tightened the straps of his harness, he whispered a prayer for his parents and for the childhood sweetheart he had not seen in 3 years. At 0645, 12 zeros lifted into the sky. The group climbed through rising clouds, engines roaring beneath their boots. Kiyoshi flew as wingman to his closest friend, a fellow ace with steady hands and a calm smile that never faltered. They had saved each other's lives more than once. Today, neither knew whether they would land again. His friend's voice crackled through the radio. "If I fall, do not come for me. Kill as many as you can." Standard words. Words meant to steal the heart. Hours passed as they flew toward the American fleet. At 10:34 they found them: 4 fleet carriers, 6 escort carriers. Destroyers and cruisers lined in defense. Anti-aircraft guns opened fire instantly. Thunderous blasts shook the sky. The sea below churned with white foam as shells exploded around the Japanese aircraft. Kiyoshi pushed his Zero into a dive toward the USS Lexington. The engines screamed, tracers streaked past his canopy. The deck of the carrier grew larger with terrifying speed. For a moment he believed he might actually hit his target. For a moment he felt the pride of a warrior fulfilling his purpose. Then a shadow crossed his vision. An American Hellcat dropped from above, guns blazing. Kiyoshi never saw it coming. The first burst ripped through his wing. Oil splattered across the glass. His left aileron vanished in a spray of metal. His Zero shuddered violently. He tried to pull up, but the nose dipped harder. His engine died with a choking cough. There was no time to think, only instinct. He yanked the canopy release. Wind tore at his face. His parachute opened unevenly, 2 panels shredded by gunfire. He hit the water too fast. Pain tore through his shoulder as it dislocated on impact. Burning oil drifted across the surface. The ocean slapped him again and again, dragging him under. His life jacket struggled to keep him afloat. Salt water filled his mouth. He spat and coughed, trying to see through the smoke. Across the waves a giant shadow approached. The USS Lexington. The same ship he had tried to destroy moments earlier. The same ship now heading directly toward him. He knew what would happen next. He had done it to enemy pilots himself. A quick burst in the water. No hesitation, no mercy. That was war. His instructors had said Americans were brutal, that they tortured prisoners, that they took none alive. His own experience had agreed. As the shadow grew larger, Kiyoshi trembled. The carrier loomed like a mountain of steel. Voices echoed faintly over the roar of engines, but he could not understand them. The water pulled at his legs, his strength faded. He whispered his last apology to his parents. Then something impossible happened. A splash, then another. 2 orange life rings hit the water near him. American life rings, with American markings, thrown by the same sailors he had been bombing. For a moment his mind refused to accept it. This had to be a trick. They would let him grab the ring. then shoot him for sport. But his body was failing. His breath came in ragged gasps, his arm barely moved. The decision was no longer philosophical, it was survival. He swam toward the ring. His hand closed around the wet canvas. He waited for the bullets. Nothing came. Instead, a rope splashed beside him. Kiyoshi clutched the rope with trembling fingers. They hauled him upward, inch by inch, as if he were not an enemy but a man worth saving. When strong hands finally pulled him over the railing, Kiyoshi collapsed on the deck, bracing himself for the rifle butt to the face. It never came. A blanket draped over his shoulders, cold water pressed to his lips. A young red-haired sailor whispered softly, "Come on, buddy, drink, you are in shock." Shock did not begin to describe it. Above him his own wingman screamed past the carrier, guns blazing, still trying to kill these men who were saving Kiyoshi's life. The contradiction tore at him like a blade. For the first time since the war began, he felt something he had forgotten existed. Confusion, doubt, and a painful sliver of hope. He did not know it yet, but this moment would reshape everything he believed about enemies, honor, and the meaning of humanity. October 24th, 1944. Philippine Sea, late afternoon. The battle still raged across the sky. Tracers arced above the USS Lexington as American sailors fought desperately to repel the Japanese attack. Explosions thudded in the distance. Smoke curled above the horizon. Yet amid the chaos, something almost unimaginable was happening on the carrier's portside catwalk. A wounded Japanese pilot, barely conscious, was being pulled from the sea by the very men he had tried to kill only minutes earlier. Seaman First Class Tommy Morrison from Tulsa, Oklahoma, had acted first. 19 years old, freckles across his cheeks, hands shaking from adrenaline, he had watched the Zero pilot hit the water at high speed. He saw the parachute rip. He saw the man struggling in flames and oil. Without waiting for orders, Tommy grabbed 2 life rings and hurled them over the rail. One missed. The other landed close enough to keep the drowning pilot alive. Chief Petty Officer Daniel Kowalski stormed toward him, shouting over the thunder of anti-aircraft guns. Tommy expected to be dragged away, perhaps even punched for disobeying orders. But after a heartbeat of hesitation, Kowalski grabbed another life ring himself and threw it with everything he had. Something unspoken passed between them. A choice. A recognition that even in the heart of war, a drowning man was still a man worth saving. As Kiyoshi was hauled upward, his body shaking uncontrollably, he prepared for the blow he believed would come. Instead, hands steadied him. Hands guided him gently. Hands wrapped him in a blanket to stop the shivering that racked his body. When the young red-haired sailor pressed a canteen to his lips, the simple kindness broke something inside him. A small crack in the wall of years of propaganda. The water tasted clean and cold. It tasted like mercy. Around him the battle continued. American sailors fired at another incoming wave of Japanese aircraft. The deck shook beneath Kiyoshi's battered body. Explosions rocked the ship. Through the haze he saw a Zero screen passed overhead, close enough that he recognized the rising sun emblem. It was his wingman, his friend, still fighting, still trying to kill these men who were kneeling beside Kiyoshi and binding his wounds. The contradiction tore through him so sharply he felt dizzy. He had been told that Americans were savages, destroyers, men without honor. Yet everything he saw now challenged that belief. The sailors did not treat him as a trophy or an animal. They treated him the way a battlefield medic treats any wounded soldier, with urgency and focus and unexpected care. Chief Kowalski knelt beside him, pointing at Kiyoshi's injured shoulder with a calm expression. The gesture was simple, universal. "This will hurt, but we will fix it." Kiyoshi nodded weakly. A Navy corpsman arrived seconds later, breathless, sweat streaking his face from hours of tending to the wounded. He positioned himself behind Kiyoshi and murmured something soothing. Kiyoshi understood none of the words. He understood everything in the tone. 1, 2. The corpsman pulled on 2, not 3. A lightning bolt of pain shot through Kiyoshi's body. He cried out, gripping the deck with his working hand. For a moment his vision blurred. Then the pain receded. His shoulder settled back into its rightful place. The corpsman wrapped the joint quickly, efficiently, with the same attention he would give to any American sailor. Kiyoshi stared at him in disbelief. He had expected pain. He had not expected gentleness. Gunfire thundered overhead. A Zero crashed into the sea somewhere nearby. The carrier rocked. Men shouted orders. Yet through all of it, the Americans shielded Kiyoshi with their bodies as if he were one of their own, as if the enemy uniform he wore did not matter in this moment of life and death. When the immediate danger passed, they carried him below deck. Morrison held one arm. Another sailor held the other. The metal hallways echoed with boots and alarms. Red battle lights flashed along the ceiling, but every time Kiyoshi stumbled, someone steadied him. When he winced, someone slowed their pace. When he whispered a weak apology in Japanese, someone patted his shoulder as if to say it was all right. In the ship's sick bay, Lieutenant Commander James Hutchinson examined him with the practiced calm of a man who had seen every kind of battlefield wound. He cleaned Kiyoshi's burns, reset fractured ribs with delicate care, and ordered broth to be brought at once. Kiyoshi lay back in a real bunk, with real sheets, unable to comprehend how the world had reversed itself so completely. Outside, the carrier engines hummed. Above, the battle continued. But inside this small room of white metal walls, there was only the steady presence of men who did not see him as a monster, but as a human being in pain. Kiyoshi closed his eyes, overwhelmed. Everything he had believed about the enemy was beginning to unravel. Everything he had been taught about honor was shifting beneath him. And in the distant sky, the war raged on, preparing a new test for his heart. October 25, 1944. USS Lexington, Philippine Sea. Dawn broke quietly over the battered carrier. The air smelled of salt and smoke from the previous day's battle. Below deck, inside the ship's sick bay, Lieutenant Kiyoshi Ogawa opened his eyes to a world that felt impossibly calm compared to the chaos he had survived. The lights were dim. The engines hummed in a steady rhythm beneath the metal floor. For the first time in years, he was lying in a clean bed with real sheets. His shoulder had been reset, his ribs wrapped, his wounds cleaned. He had expected interrogation, pain, humiliation. Instead, he smelled something warm drifting through the air. Soup. An American corpsman approached with a small tray. He smiled softly as he placed it beside Kiyoshi's bed. A bowl of chicken soup. Real broth. Real pieces of meat. Steam curled in the air. Kiyoshi stared at it as if it were a hallucination. He had eaten little more than rice balls and dried fish for months. His body trembled with hunger, confusion, and a strange sense of vulnerability. The corpsman lifted the spoon and gently gestured for him to eat. Kiyoshi obeyed, though his hands shook. The first sip burned his tongue, and tears unexpectedly filled his eyes. Warmth, kindness, safety, things he had forgotten could exist in wartime. Later that morning, footsteps approached. Tommy Morrison appeared in the doorway, carrying something wrapped in wax paper. The young red-haired sailor looked nervous, as if unsure whether it was appropriate to disturb a prisoner. When Kiyoshi noticed him, Tommy stepped inside. He sat on the edge of the bunk and unwrapped the package. Inside was a Hershey chocolate bar. He broke off a piece and held it out. Kiyoshi blinked. He had never seen American chocolate before. He took it carefully, as if it might vanish. The sweetness hit him like a shock. It melted on his tongue, rich and warm. For a moment he forgot the war completely. He forgot the fear, the propaganda, the pain. He closed his eyes and let a small, fragile smile slip through. Tommy grinned wide. Good, right? Kiyoshi did not understand the words, but he understood everything in the boy's face. Hours passed. American sailors came and went, checking supplies, whispering to each other, some stopping to glance at the injured man who had been their enemy the day before. But none spat at him, none mocked him. Some even nodded politely as they walked past, acknowledging him not as a monster, but simply as another human being placed in their care. That evening Tommy returned. This time he brought a small wallet from his pocket. Inside was a photograph, a young woman with dark curls standing beside a Ford car. Tommy pointed at the picture, then at his heart, then made a ring shape with his fingers. Kiyoshi realized he was showing him his sweetheart. "Betty," Tommy said proudly, "my girl back home." Kiyoshi felt an ache deep inside his chest. He thought of his own sweetheart in Japan, a young woman he had promised to marry. He did not know if she was alive. He did not know if she remembered him. The war had stolen everything, even certainty. When he shook his head sadly, Tommy placed a comforting hand on his shoulder. No words were exchanged, none were needed. On the fourth day, something remarkable happened. Kiyoshi was well enough to walk slowly with assistance. Tommy led him up to the mess deck, guiding him gently through the narrow corridors. When they arrived, more than 40 American sailors were eating, laughing, playing cards. Conversations halted when they saw the Japanese pilot enter. But instead of hostility, the room filled with a quiet curiosity. Kiyoshi sat in a corner seat. No one stopped him, no one pushed him away. A sailor with sandy hair, barely older than Kiyoshi, held up a deck of cards and gestured toward the empty seat beside him. Kiyoshi hesitated. The sailor nodded again, smiling. The two played gin rummy using gestures instead of words. When Kiyoshi won a round, laughter rippled across the table. The sailor won the next. Kiyoshi smiled back. For the first time in years he felt normal, not a pilot, not a prisoner, not an enemy. Just a man sharing a moment with other men who, days earlier, had tried to kill him. Later that evening, Dr. Hutchinson visited with a translator, a Japanese-American interpreter named George Suzuki. Through Suzuki, the doctor explained the rules of the Geneva Convention. Kiyoshi listened, astonished. He was to receive the same medical care as American crew members. He would eat the same food. He would not be harmed. He would not be tortured. He would be allowed to rest, recover, and eventually send a letter home. A letter home. The words struck him with overwhelming force. The doctor placed paper and a pen in his hands. Kiyoshi stared at the blank sheet for a long time. His hand trembled as he began writing. "Honored mother and father, I am alive." He paused. The truth felt unreal. I am being treated well. The Americans are caring for me. When he finished, Suzuki took the letter, bowing respectfully. It would be delivered through the Red Cross, he explained. Kiyoshi bowed deeply in return. Gratitude overwhelmed him. Hope overwhelmed him. That night, Kiyoshi lay in his bunk, listening to the quiet hum of the carrier engine. He thought of the life ring thrown to him, the chocolate bar shared with him, the games of cards, the gentle hands bandaging his wounds, the doctor explaining dignity, the sailors who had risked their lives to save him. He thought of everything he had been taught about Americans, every warning, every lie, and as he stared at the metal ceiling, he felt the first fragile seed of transformation taking root in his heart. October 27th, 1944. USS Lexington, Philippine Sea. The war still thundered somewhere beyond the steel walls of the carrier, but inside the sick bay, time moved gently. Lieutenant Kiyoshi Ogawa woke to the soft glow of overhead lights and the steady vibration of engines that carried the Lexington through calm morning waters. His body ached, but the pain no longer dominated him. What haunted him instead was the kindness. A kindness so profound that it felt almost dangerous because it challenged the foundation of everything he had been trained to believe. Doctors made their morning rounds with practiced ease, checking wounds, changing bandages, speaking in quick English that Kiyoshi could not understand. Yet every tone was reassuring, every touch precise, every glance respectful. It unsettled him more than cruelty ever could have. Cruelty would have affirmed the lessons drilled into him for years. Compassion, however, forced him to confront a truth his mind struggled to accept. The Americans did not treat him as a monster. As the ship moved through the sea, an interpreter entered. A slim, soft-spoken Japanese-American sailor named George Suzuki, whose eyes held a quiet understanding. When Suzuki spoke to Kiyoshi in fluent Japanese, Kiyoshi felt his throat tighten with sudden emotion. Hearing his mother tongue after days of confusion felt like breathing clean air after smoke. Dr. Hutchinson sat beside the bunk as Suzuki translated. Through him, the doctor explained the Geneva Convention, the rules that governed American treatment of prisoners, the insistence on providing food, shelter, medical care, equal to their own. Kiyoshi listened in stunned silence. "You will not be harmed," Suzuki translated. "You will not be tortured. You will receive the same care as our wounded." Kiyoshi stared at the doctor, at his calm eyes, at his steady hands folded on his lap. Why? The question lived in his mind, trembling. "Ask him," Suzuki encouraged gently. Kiyoshi swallowed hard. "Doctor, why would?" You do this? I am the enemy. Hutchinson paused. He seemed to search for the right words. Suzuki translated slowly, carefully. Because we are at war with your government, not with you. You are a man in pain, a pilot doing his duty. And dignity is something we owe to every human being. The word dignity struck Kiyoshi like a blow. He lowered his head, tears burning behind his eyes. When had anyone in his own military, his commanders, his instructors, even his leaders, spoken of dignity for those they fought? The Imperial Navy had taught sacrifice, obedience, and death before dishonor. It had never spoken of dignity for the enemy. That afternoon, Suzuki returned with a small envelope and a calm smile. The Red Cross has accepted your letter, he said. It will reach Japan. Kiyoshi trembled. He had written that letter expecting nothing, expecting it to vanish into the air like a whisper. Yet now the possibility grew real. His mother and father would know he was alive. They would know he was not floating nameless somewhere in the sea. He bowed his head deeply. Thank you, he whispered. The next days continued to unravel everything he had believed. American sailors visited often. Morrison returned daily, bringing cookies, chocolate, or simply chatter that Kiyoshi barely understood but always appreciated. One afternoon Tommy brought a small dictionary and pointed to words, laughing as Kiyoshi repeated them with a thick accent. The young sailor's joy was infectious. Other sailors followed. A farm boy from Nebraska who showed him letters from home. A mechanic from Chicago who joked through half of the evening. A quiet man from Maine who told stories about snowstorms Kiyoshi had never imagined. They showed him pictures of their families, their sweethearts, their children, and with every photo, every smile, every gesture, Kiyoshi felt the invisible walls inside him begin to crumble. These men had lives they wanted to return to, dreams waiting for them at home, futures they hoped to survive long enough to see, just like him. One evening, Suzuki sat with him again. You are wondering why Americans treat you this way, he said. Kiyoshi nodded faintly. Suzuki folded his hands, thinking. My family is in California, in camps. We were put there because of fear, because of war. But even then, the rules say we cannot be harmed. There are things Americans struggle with, but there are also values they fight for. Freedom, mercy, civilization. Those values are imperfect, but they are real. Kiyoshi stared at him. A Japanese American speaking calmly about fairness even while his own family suffered. The contradiction made Koshi's chest tighten. What about Japanese prisoners? Kiyoshi asked quietly. Many will not survive, Suzuki answered honestly. Your army and navy do not follow the same rules. Shame washed over Kiyoshi, heavy. How many had been tortured or starved? And yet here he was being treated like a wounded comrade. He whispered, Why am I alive? Suzuki replied, Because someone believed your life mattered. That night, Kiyoshi lay awake long after the lights dimmed. He replayed the moment in the water, the life rings falling near him, Morrison shouting, Kowalski throwing the second ring, the hands pulling him to safety, the blanket, the soup, the chocolate, the doctor, the interpreter. He remembered his wingman streaking across the sky, trying to destroy the ship that had saved him. The war felt far away now, yet its reality pressed against his heart with crushing force. He was alive because his enemy had shown mercy where none was expected. He was alive because strangers had chosen humanity over vengeance. That realization reshaped him. It rewrote the very meaning of loyalty, honor, and sacrifice. As the ship carried him across the open sea, Kiyoshi felt the fracture within him widen into a new truth, a truth he would carry for the rest of his life. That dignity in wartime was not weakness, it was strength deeper than any weapon. October 30th, 1944. USS Lexington, en route to Guam. The Pacific stretched endlessly in every direction, calm and deceptively peaceful. Waves rolled in soft rhythms against the hull of the USS Lexington as she carried her wounded, her crew, and one Japanese pilot whose life had taken a direction he never could have imagined. Lieutenant Kiyoshi Ogawa lay in his bunk, the metal walls faintly vibrating with the heartbeat of the ship. He was healing, but he was also breaking away from everything he had been taught, breaking into something new. Each day aboard the Lexington added another layer to his transformation. The sailors treated him not as a prisoner, but as someone to protect. Morrison visited often, bringing small comforts from the crew. A cookie wrapped in napkin paper, a book with pictures, a spare navy jacket to replace Koshi's torn flight suit. These gifts were simple, yet each felt like a message that dug deeper into his heart. You matter. You are safe. You are human. On the seventh morning, the hum of the carrier engines changed slightly. The Lexington had begun slowing. Suzuki entered with quiet steps and informed him gently, "We are nearing Guam. You will be transferred to a larger prisoner facility. They will take good care of you." Koshi nodded, though his stomach tightened. He had grown used to Morrison's warm grin, Dr. Hutchinson's gentle voice, Kowalski's stern kindness. Leaving them felt like leaving a tiny island of humanity in a world still burning. But he knew the war continued. The Lexington had battles ahead. He could no longer be on her deck. Morrison came to say goodbye. He brought one last chocolate bar, placing it into Koshi's hands with a soft grin. "Take care, buddy," he said, tapping his chest. Koshi understood the gesture. He bowed deeply, tears threatening to spill. Then he touched his forehead, his heart, and pointed at Morrison. A gesture of respect. A gesture of gratitude too large for words. When Koshi was moved to the transport boat, Morrison stood at the railing, waving until the small craft disappeared from sight. Guam was the beginning of a new chapter of captivity, but one that shattered him far less than he expected. The American POW facility was not a cage of cruelty. It was orderly, clean and structured. He received food 3 times a day. Medical checkups continued. Guards watched them, but their expressions were not hateful. There were rules, fairness, predictability. And for a man who had spent years sleeping beside his aircraft, eating scraps and watching friends die without ceremony, this strange safety felt like a kind of rebirth. From Guam, Koshi was later transferred to a camp in Hawaii. There, he found an entire community of Japanese prisoners rebuilding themselves from the ashes of war. They farmed fields, tended gardens, learned English, attended classes, and wrote letters home. Many had expected death or torture. Instead, they found structure, dignity, and hope. It was in Hawaii that Koshi realized how deeply he had changed. One afternoon, a camp instructor asked him to read an English passage aloud. Koshi hesitated, then slowly formed the words. The room filled with encouraging voices. Men who had lost everything still found the strength to cheer. Something warm and powerful spread through his chest. In that moment, he no longer felt like a prisoner. He felt like someone returning to life. Months passed. With time, the shock of battle faded, replaced by quiet routines. He gained weight, his ribs healed, his scars softened, yet every night as he lay on a bunk under the Hawaiian stars, he remembered the hands that pulled him from the sea, the voices that shouted encouragement, the chocolate bar from a farm boy in Oklahoma. His transformation reached its deepest level on a warm summer night as the radio crackled across the camp. The war was ending. Rumors whispered that Japan was surrendering. Some prisoners wept with relief, others with shame. Koshi stood, silently under the moonlight, tears sliding down his face, not from dishonor, not from defeat, but from release. The war had taken so much, but it had given him something too, a truth that would guide him for the rest of his years, a truth he would one day teach his children, a truth he carried like an invisible medal. The Americans had shown him mercy where none was required, and mercy had changed him. It took 4 months before Koshi finally saw Japanese soil again. In December 1945, he stepped off a transport ship in Yokohama. His homeland was unrecognizable. Ruins, broken streets, homes shattered by firebombs. But as he walked through the rubble, the letter he had written aboard the Lexington still lived in his mother's hands. She wept when she saw him. His father embraced him without a word. He found his sweetheart alive, working in a textile factory. When she saw him standing in the doorway, she covered her mouth and sobbed. The reunion was not loud or dramatic. It was quiet, trembling, filled with a gratitude that words could never hold. They married in 1947. Life slowly rebuilt itself. Koshi became a translator for the American occupation forces, then for Japanese companies trading with the United States. His English improved with surprising speed. His understanding of American culture deepened, and every year he searched for Morrison, the young sailor who had thrown him a life ring in the middle of a burning sea. It took 24 years. In 1969, Kiyoshi finally found him living in Tulsa with Betty and 4 children. Kiyoshi boarded a plane and flew across the ocean to see him. At the airport, Morrison approached slowly, unsure. Kiyoshi stepped forward. The 2 men who had once been enemies embraced like brothers who had lived 1,000 lifetimes together. Betty cried. Morrison laughed and cried at the same time. Their children stared in awe. Kiyoshi stayed 2 weeks. He played with the grandchildren, helped Betty cook, watched American television and laughed at jokes he barely understood. And on the final night, as the 2 men sat on the back porch with beers in their hands, Kiyoshi finally asked the question that had haunted him for 25 years. Why did you save me? Morrison looked into the distance for a long time, then shrugged gently. You were just a man drowning, he said, and helping felt like the right thing to do. Kiyoshi closed his eyes. The answer was simple. And it was everything. November 15th, 1991. Corpus Christi, Texas. The wind swept gently across the deck of the USS Lexington, now preserved as a floating museum. Tourists moved along her steel corridors, unaware that one of the most extraordinary reunions of wartime history was about to unfold. Near the bow, an elderly Japanese man rested his hand on the railing. His eyes shimmered with tears as he gazed over the water. That man was Kiyoshi Ogawa, now 73 years old, standing on the same ship that had once saved his life in the middle of the Philippine Sea. The deck beneath him was no longer stained with battle. Children laughed in the distance, cameras clicked. But for Kiyoshi, the past layered over the present. He could still see burning oil drifting on the sea below. He could hear explosions echoing through the sky. And he could still feel the rough rope between his fingers as American sailors pulled him out of death's grip. This ship had once been a battlefield. Then it became a sanctuary. Now it represented a lesson he had spent nearly 5 decades trying to share with the world. When the speech ceremony began, the crowd gathered around him in respectful silence. Kiyoshi stepped forward, gripping the podium with trembling hands. His voice wavered at first, then grew stronger. I came to this ship expecting to die in glory, he began. Instead, I learned to live in dignity. That education changed my life. It changed my children's lives, and now it shapes the lives of my grandchildren. As he spoke, memories flooded him. The life ring splashing near him, Tommy Morrison's desperate courage, Chief Kowalski throwing the second ring with a curse and a prayer, Dr. Hutchinson's steady hands stitching his wounds, Morrison's chocolate bar melting in his mouth, the sound of laughter around the card table, where enemies had become something far more precious. Kiyoshi's voice softened. Human life has value, even in war, especially in war. The audience stood frozen, many with tears glistening. Veterans nodded slowly, remembering their own battles, their own losses, their own moments of unexpected mercy. He continued, Tokyo taught us many things about America. None of them were true. I learned the truth on this deck. I learned it from a 19-year-old farm boy from Oklahoma who believed that drowning men should be saved. A quiet murmur moved through the crowd like wind through tall grass. Kiyoshi's story had been told before, in newspapers, documentaries, interviews, but hearing it from the man himself carried a weight that no article could replicate. After the ceremony, a woman approached him cautiously. She held the hand of a small boy with bright blue eyes. My grandfather served on this ship, she said gently. He used to tell us the story of the Japanese pilot who was saved. He said it reminded him of what goodness looks like. I think he would have liked to meet you. Kiyoshi's heart swelled. He knelt to the boy's level. Always choose kindness, he whispered. The child nodded, as if memorizing the words forever. That evening, Kiyoshi sat alone on the flight deck, the sunset painting the sky in soft streaks of gold and red. He closed his eyes and remembered his reunion with Tommy Morrison back in 1969. He remembered the embrace, the tears, Betty's warm smile, the smell of home-cooked pot roast, the way Tommy had shrugged when asked why he saved him. It just seemed like the right thing to do. Simple words from a simple man. Yet those words had shaped the future of two families, two nations, and perhaps even the world. Japan and the United States, once mortal enemies, had become powerful allies by 1955. Their friendship would define global politics for decades. And while governments handled the diplomacy, men like Morrison and Kiyoshi carried the human story that made reconciliation possible. Historians often pointed to the Marshall Plan, the occupation reforms, or strategic alliances as the foundation of post-war peace. But men like Kiyoshi knew the truth. Peace was built long before treaties. Peace began in moments of mercy, moments when someone could choose cruelty but chose dignity instead. Across America, former German, Italian, and Japanese POWs told similar stories. They told their children how American soldiers had shared cigarettes, food, kindness. They told them how they had been treated not as enemies, but as men deserving of respect. And those stories shaped generations. Some of those children would grow up believing in democracy. Others would marry Americans. Others would become American citizens themselves. Some would serve in the US military, defending the very country their fathers once fought against. Kiyoshi's own family carried that legacy. His son studied in California. His daughter married an American engineer, and 3 of his grandchildren were American citizens raised on stories of courage, mercy, and a life ring thrown in the middle of a raging sea. As night settled over the Lexington, Kiyoshi whispered a soft prayer for Tommy Morrison, who had passed away in 2007, still keeping Kiyoshi's letters in his desk drawer. 2 men, once enemies, forever bound by compassion. Kiyoshi stood one last time at the railing. He let the wind brush against his face. "Thank you," he whispered to the sea. Not to fate, not to luck, but to the choice of a 19-year-old boy who believed that saving a life mattered more than taking one. War ends, peace must be built. And sometimes that peace begins with a single life ring falling into the water.